The quiet before the storm. The private terminal was quiet, bathed in the warm hues of a morning sun. Elliot McAllister strode confidently through the polished marble foyer, the crisp air-conditioned breeze brushing against his tailored navy suit. At 39, Elliot exuded the poised assurance of a man who had climbed every rung of the ladder himself. His meticulously groomed appearance, from the sheen of his Italian loafers to the gleaming black leather briefcase he carried, was a testament to his precision and pride. Walking alongside him was his executive assistant, Simone Hayes, a sharp-eyed, impeccably organized woman whose efficiency was legendary. She carried a tablet, her fingers moving swiftly as she reviewed the agenda for their upcoming flight to Geneva. "We're 20 minutes ahead of schedule, Mr. McAllister," Simone said with a satisfied smile. "The proposal is prepped, and I've already confirmed with our contacts in Switzerland. Everything is set for your presentation." Elliot smiled faintly, his deep baritone voice as measured as his stride. "Good. That gives us time to go over the details one more time before we board." The terminal was designed for the elite, sleek and modern, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of private jets parked on the tarmac. Plush leather chairs were arranged in intimate clusters for executives awaiting flights, while a soft hum of activity filled the air. Elliot scanned the space briefly, nodding cordially to a fellow businessman seated nearby. Approaching the security gate, Simone handed over their documents to the attendant, a middle-aged woman whose name tag read Bethany Carter. She barely glanced up as Simone handed her the boarding passes and IDs. Her expression shifted as her eyes flicked over the documents to Elliot, her lips pressing into a tight, thin line. "Good morning," Simone said pleasantly. "We're here for the 9:30 flight to Geneva." Bethany's gaze lingered on Elliot, her demeanor instantly frosty. She adjusted her blazer, straightening as though preparing for confrontation. "May I see your identification again, sir?" she asked curtly, despite holding the very documents in her hand. Simone blinked, taken aback. "You have it right there," she said, her voice edged with confusion. Bethany ignored her, fixing her attention on Elliot. "This is a private terminal for premium passengers only," she said, her tone tinged with condescension. "Perhaps you're in the wrong area." Elliot's brow furrowed, though his composure remained intact. "This is correct," he said calmly, his deep voice carrying an air of authority. "I'm the owner of the aircraft scheduled for departure." Bethany's lips twitched, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Let's not cause a scene. We reserve the right to deny access to anyone who doesn't meet the standards of this service." Simone's eyes widened in shock. "Excuse me? Standards?" Her voice was sharp now, disbelief overtaking her usual restraint. "Mr. McAllister is—" Bethany cut her off with a sharp glare. "I don't care who he claims to be. You need to leave, or I'll call security." The knot in Elliot's stomach tightened. He was no stranger to prejudice, but the audacity of such blatant discrimination in a place designed for his demographic. A billionaire, a pioneer in renewable technology, and one of the most influential figures in his field, was both humiliating and infuriating. Elliot took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "I'd appreciate it if you could clarify what the issue is." Bethany smirked, a thin, cold smile. "The issue, sir, is that this is an exclusive space for a certain class of clientele. If you don't leave now, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." Simone stepped forward, her fury evident. "Do you know who you're speaking to? This is Elliot McAllister, CEO of one of the world's largest—" "I said leave," Bethany interrupted, her hand inching toward the phone on her desk. The terminal felt stifling now, the glances of other travelers like pinpricks on Elliot's skin. He looked at Simone, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Let's go," he said quietly, his tone laced with simmering anger. Simone hesitated, her indignation palpable. "Elliot, we can't let this slide. This is—" "We'll handle it," Elliot interrupted, his voice steady but with an undertone of resolve. "Not here." He turned and walked away, each step deliberate and measured. Simone followed, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor as she struggled to contain her outrage. The hum of the terminal grew quieter as they moved toward a secluded seating area. Once seated, Elliot placed his briefcase on the low table before him, his hands resting atop it. His gaze was fixed on the runway outside, his reflection in the glass a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Simone sat beside him, her tablet now clutched tightly in her hands. "This is unacceptable," Simone said, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice trembled with anger. "To treat you like this, here, of all places, we have to take action." Elliot didn't respond immediately. His fingers tapped the surface of his briefcase rhythmically, a habit of his when deep in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "We will." Simone's posture straightened, sensing the shift in his tone. "How?" Elliot turned to face her, his dark eyes gleaming with a cold determination. "First, we document everything. Every word, every action. I want names, timestamps, and witnesses. Then we dig. Who's behind this airline? Who sets their policies? Who enforces them?" Simone nodded, already pulling up files on her tablet. "Bethany Carter, the attendant. There's also a supervisor. I saw his badge. Thomas Reed. Good. Get me everything on them. I want their employment history, training records, and any prior incidents." Elliot's voice grew firmer, the weight of his anger tempered by his strategic mind. "And I want a full report on the airline's executive team. Their diversity policies, hiring practices, anything that points to systemic issues." Simone was already typing furiously. "Done. And Elliot, we control the booking software they're negotiating to adopt. That's leverage." A faint smile crossed Elliot's lips, devoid of warmth. "Then we'll make them regret this." As the morning light shifted, casting long shadows across the terminal, Elliot McAllister resolved that this would be more than a personal battle. It was a fight against the systemic discrimination that had allowed this moment to happen, and he wouldn't rest until justice was served. Unearthing the system, Elliot sat in the back of his sleek black car, the city skyline reflecting in the tinted windows. His phone buzzed in his hand, the screen lighting up with updates from Simone. The earlier confrontation replayed in his mind like a relentless loop, each second fueling his determination. He wasn't just angry, he was resolute. Simone's voice crackled over the car's Bluetooth speaker. "Elliot, I've pulled everything on Bethany Carter and her supervisor, Thomas Reed. You're going to want to hear this." "Go ahead," Elliot replied, his tone as sharp as the suit he wore. "Bethany's been with the airline for 8 years, Simone began. She's had several complaints filed against her for unprofessional conduct, including accusations of discrimination. But every complaint mysteriously disappeared from her record." Elliot's grip on the phone tightened. "And Thomas?" "Similar story. He's been with the company for 12 years, steadily climbing the ranks despite a string of complaints. He's known for brushing off grievances, especially those involving minority passengers or employees." Elliot leaned back in his seat, the leather creaking under the weight of his frustration. "So, we're dealing with a pattern, not an anomaly." "Exactly," Simone said. "And it gets worse. The airline's CEO, Martin Grayson, has a reputation for being old school. He's publicly dismissed the need for diversity initiatives, calling them a distraction from efficiency." Elliot's lips pressed into a thin line. "Send me everything you have on Grayson and the board." "Already done," Simone replied. "I've also flagged a few articles and internal reports. There's a history of the airline quietly settling discrimination lawsuits. They've managed to keep it out of the headlines, but the evidence is there." Elliot nodded, though Simone couldn't see him. "Good work. Schedule a meeting with our legal team this afternoon. I want every angle covered." "Will do," Simone said. "Oh, and one more thing. James Chen from Pacific Investments reached out. He witnessed everything at the terminal. He's offered to back you up if you decide to go public. A small, grim smile tugged at the corners of Elliot's mouth. That's a card we'll keep in our pocket for now. Let's focus on the internal pressure first. As the call ended, Elliot's driver pulled up to TechCore Tower, the headquarters of his sprawling technology empire. The building was a testament to innovation, its glass facade gleaming in the midday sun. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy, employees moving with purpose through the expansive modern space. Elliot strode through the lobby, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every person who had been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. In the executive conference room, a team of lawyers and public relations specialists waited for Elliot. The air was thick with anticipation as he entered, his presence commanding attention. Simone followed close behind, her tablet already filled with notes and data. Elliot took his seat at the head of the table, his dark eyes scanning the room. Let's get started. One of the lawyers, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Langston, leaned forward. Mr. McAllister, we've reviewed the incident and the airline's history. There's enough here to build a strong case, but we need to decide how far you want to take this. All the way, Elliot said without hesitation. This isn't just about me. It's about systemic injustice. Richard nodded. Understood. We can pursue legal action, but that might take years. Alternatively, we can leverage public opinion. A story like this could go viral, especially with your platform. Elliot considered this for a moment. We'll do both. Legal action to force accountability, and a strategic PR campaign to expose the truth. But we need to be meticulous. No room for errors. Simone interjected. I've already compiled a list of witnesses, including James Chen. His credibility alone could sway public opinion. Elliot's gaze shifted to the head of PR, a poised woman named Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca, how do we frame this? Rebecca adjusted her glasses, her expression thoughtful. We position you as a champion for change, someone who's not just fighting for himself, but for everyone who's ever been mistreated. The narrative needs to highlight your success and the absurdity of the discrimination you faced. It's not just offensive. It's bad business. Elliot nodded. Good. And what about the airline stakeholders? Who's their largest investor? Simone tapped her tablet. That would be Nexus Capital. They own a 15% stake in the airline and have a reputation for being socially conscious. If we apply the right pressure, they could become allies. Elliot's lips curved into a calculating smile. Reach out to Nexus. Let them know what happened and make it clear that silence won't protect them. If they want to maintain their image, they'll need to take a stand. The room buzzed with activity as the team began dividing tasks. Elliot felt a sense of momentum building, a shift in the tides. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was taking control. Later that evening, Elliot sat in his penthouse office, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Simone entered, a folder in hand. We've made progress, she said, placing the folder on his desk. The legal team is drafting a formal complaint, and Rebecca's team has prepared a statement. It's powerful. Elliot opened the folder, scanning the statement. It was concise yet impactful, weaving his personal experience with a broader call to action. It wasn't just a condemnation. It was a rallying cry. Good, he said, setting the folder aside. What about the media? Simone smiled. We've got interest from several major outlets, including Forbes and the New York Times. They're eager to cover the story, especially given your profile. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. Let's time the release carefully. We need to coordinate with the legal filing for maximum impact. Simone nodded. Understood. And Elliot, I just want to say, the way you're handling this, it's inspiring. You're turning something terrible into a force for good. Elliot met her gaze, his expression softening for a moment. Thank you, Simone. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this. As Simone left, Elliot turned his attention to the cityscape. He thought about the countless others who had been humiliated, dismissed, or silenced. This fight wasn't just his. It was theirs too. And he wouldn't stop until justice was served. The spotlight turns. The following morning, the sun rose over a city already abuzz with murmurs of an unfolding scandal. In Elliot McAllister's office, the tension was palpable. His executive team was gathered around a massive glass conference table, screens projecting charts, timelines, and a growing list of names. The incident at the private terminal had already begun to ripple through the business world, and the stakes were mounting. Simone was the first to speak, her voice clear and unwavering. "We've got confirmation. Nexus Capital's board has scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss their stake in the airline. They're concerned about the optics, especially given their public commitment to diversity and inclusion." Elliot nodded, his gaze fixed on the glowing city skyline outside the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows. "Good. That's the kind of pressure we need. What about the media?" Rebecca Sterling, the head of PR, stepped in, her tone brisk and professional. "The story is gaining traction. We've strategically leaked key details to select journalists. The narrative is already shifting in our favor. Successful black entrepreneur targeted by systemic discrimination at one of the world's largest airlines." Elliot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And the public response?" Rebecca clicked her tablet, bringing up a graph. "Overwhelmingly supportive. Social media is on fire with hashtags like #FlyFair and #StandWithElliot. We've seen posts from activists, celebrities, and even a few politicians. The airline is scrambling. They've put out a vague statement about reviewing their policies, but it's not gaining traction." Elliot allowed himself a small, grim smile. Let them scramble. They'll have to do more than issue empty platitudes. By midday, Elliot had taken a step he rarely did. He granted an exclusive interview to a major news outlet, the New York Times. Seated in his penthouse office, the journalist, a seasoned reporter named Diane West, leaned forward, her recorder poised. "Mr. McAllister," she began, her voice measured, "you've been in the public eye for years as a tech innovator and philanthropist. Why take this incident public now?" Elliot's eyes locked on hers, his tone calm but resolute. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about a system that perpetuates inequality. I've worked hard to achieve what I have, but moments like this remind me that no amount of success can shield you from prejudice. I'm using my platform because I can, and because I must." Diane nodded, scribbling notes. "You've chosen a dual approach, legal action and public pressure. Do you think that's the most effective way to bring change?" Elliot leaned back slightly, his hands clasped. "I think it's the only way. Legal action ensures accountability, while public pressure forces transparency. Institutions don't change because they want to. They change because they have to." "And the airline?" Diane pressed. "What are you hoping to achieve?" Elliot's expression hardened. "I'm not interested in apologies. I want systemic change. Policies, practices, training. I want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Ever." The interview continued for nearly an hour, Elliot's composed yet impassioned responses painting a vivid picture of a man determined to make a difference. By the time Diane left, the weight of his words lingered in the room. That afternoon, Nexus Capital reached out. Elliot took the call in his office, Simone sitting across from him with her tablet at the ready. The voice on the other end belonged to Karen Lynn, a senior board member known for her no-nonsense approach. "Mr. McAllister," Karen began, her tone crisp, "let me start by saying how appalled we are by the treatment you received. Nexus Capital has always prided itself on ethical investments, and this situation is unacceptable." "I appreciate that," Elliot replied, his voice measured. "But words alone won't fix this." Karen hesitated, then sighed. "You're right. That's why I'm calling. We're prepared to exert pressure on the airline's board to initiate a complete overhaul of their diversity and inclusion policies. However, we need your cooperation to ensure this doesn't devolve into a PR nightmare for all involved. Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you asking me to soften my approach? Not at all, Karen replied quickly. We're asking for a partnership. Use your influence to guide the changes rather than letting this spiral into a prolonged battle. Together, we can make real progress. Elliot considered her words, his gaze flickering to Simone, who nodded subtly. I'll consider it, he said finally. But make no mistake, progress will happen, whether through partnership or pressure. As the day wore on, the airline's executives scrambled to contain the fallout. A hastily organized press conference was announced, with CEO Martin Grayson taking the podium. Flanked by his team, Grayson's face was a mask of forced composure as he addressed a room full of reporters. We at Global Air are deeply committed to providing an inclusive and welcoming experience for all our passengers, Grayson began, his voice steady but devoid of sincerity. The incident involving Mr. McAllister is under investigation, and we are reviewing our policies to ensure such events do not occur in the future. The reporters, however, were not so easily appeased. Questions flew, each more pointed than the last. Why has your airline faced multiple allegations of discrimination over the years? Do you have any comments on Mr. McAllister's claims that this is systemic? What specific actions are you taking beyond an investigation? Grayson's responses grew more evasive with each question, his frustration evident. The press conference ended with more questions than answers. The airline's credibility further eroded. Back at TechCore Tower, Elliot and his team watched the press conference unfold on a large screen in the conference room. As Grayson stumbled through his responses, Rebecca smirked. They're floundering. Elliot's expression remained stoic. Good. Now we push harder. Simone tapped her tablet, pulling up a list of action items. We've got meetings scheduled with Nexus, our legal team, and several advocacy groups. And Diane West's article goes live tomorrow morning. It's going to hit hard. Elliot nodded, his resolve unshaken. This is just the beginning. We're not stopping until we see real change. That evening, Elliot returned to his penthouse, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the heat of the battle he was waging. As he gazed out at the city lights, his thoughts drifted to the countless others who had faced similar injustices without the platform or resources to fight back. This wasn't just his fight, it was theirs too. Elliot raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the moonlight. To justice, he murmured, the words a quiet vow to himself and to the countless others who were counting on him to see this through. A reckoning in the shadows. Elliot McAllister sat in the center of the war room at TechCore Tower, a space usually reserved for strategy meetings about multi-million-dollar deals or new tech rollouts. Today, it was the nerve center of a battle for justice. The large digital screen at the front of the room displayed a web of connections, names, and policies, threads of a systemic problem Elliot was determined to unravel. Simone, seated beside him, had spent hours compiling a dossier on the airline's practices. Her voice was steady but intense as she presented her findings. The airline's track record is worse than we anticipated. Over the last 5 years, they've settled 8 discrimination lawsuits, all under non-disclosure agreements. 3 involved passengers. 5 involved employees. Each case points to a pattern of behavior, not isolated incidents. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he absorbed the information. And the settlements. Who authorized them? Martin Grayson himself, Simone replied, clicking through slides. He signed off on everyone. Their strategy seems to be containment. Pay off the victims, keep it quiet, and continue business as usual. Elliot's eyes narrowed. Not anymore. This stops here. In the early afternoon, Elliot convened a meeting with Nexus Capital. Karen Lynn and 2 other board members joined via video call. their expressions somber but resolute. Elliot sat at the head of the table, Simon and Rebecca flanking him. Karen spoke first. "Mr. McAllister, we've reviewed the evidence you provided. It's clear the airline's leadership has fostered a toxic culture. Nexus Capital cannot, in good conscience, continue our investment without significant changes." Elliot nodded. "And those changes?" Karen hesitated, glancing at her colleagues. "We want your guidance on that. You've uncovered the rot. We need to know how to rebuild." Elliot's voice was firm. "First, Grayson has to go. He's the architect of this culture, and as long as he's in charge, nothing will change." The other board members exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. Karen sighed. "We'll push for his removal at the next board meeting." "What else?" "Independent oversight," Elliot continued. "A third-party audit of their hiring, training, and operational policies. Transparency in the findings, and a public commitment to rebuilding trust, not just through words but actions." Karen leaned forward, her expression serious. "You're asking for a complete overhaul. That's not a small request." Elliot met her gaze, unflinching. "It's not a request. It's the price of their survival." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Karen nodded. "We'll make it happen." As Nexus Capital prepared to take action, Elliot's team shifted focus to the public narrative. Rebecca Sterling gathered her PR team to craft a comprehensive campaign, one that balanced Elliot's personal story with a broader call for systemic change. "We need to highlight the human element," Rebecca said during a brainstorming session. "This isn't just about policies. It's about people. Let's focus on the passengers and employees who've suffered because of this culture." Simon chimed in. "I've reached out to some of the plaintiffs from the previous lawsuits. A few are willing to speak, as long as we protect their anonymity." Rebecca nodded. "Perfect. We'll weave their stories into the campaign. And Elliot, we'll need you to be the face of this. Your credibility and platform are our strongest assets." Elliot agreed, though the weight of responsibility was clear in his expression. "Whatever it takes," he said simply. The next day, Elliot found himself back in the public eye, this time on a live morning news program. The studio lights were bright, the cameras trained on him as the host. A poised journalist named Rachel Carter introduced him. "Elliot McAllister, billionaire entrepreneur and CEO of McAllister Innovations, joins us today to discuss his experience with Global Air and the broader implications of discrimination in corporate culture." Elliot sat tall, his tailored suit impeccable, his expression calm but resolute. "Thank you for having me, Rachel." Rachel wasted no time. "Your story has struck a chord with millions of people. Why do you think this incident has resonated so deeply?" "Because it's not just my story," Elliot replied, his voice measured but passionate. "It's the story of countless individuals who face discrimination every day. I'm fortunate to have a platform to speak out, but many don't. This is about making sure their voices are heard too." Rachel leaned forward. "What changes do you hope to see come from this?" "Accountability," Elliot said firmly. "Not just for the individuals involved in my case, but for the entire system that allowed this to happen. That means leadership changes, transparent policies, and a commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect." The interview continued, Elliot's words striking a balance between personal experience and systemic critique. By the time the segment ended, the momentum behind his cause had only grown stronger. Back at TechCore Tower, Elliot's legal team delivered a critical update. Richard Langston, the lead attorney, entered the conference room with a folder in hand. "We've filed the lawsuit," Richard announced. "It's comprehensive. Discrimination, emotional distress, and damages for loss of time and reputation. The evidence is strong, and with Nexus Capital's support, the airline will be hard-pressed to mount a defense." Elliot nodded, satisfied. "Good. Let's make sure this doesn't just settle in court. I want this to set a precedent." Simon added, I've also scheduled a meeting with the advocacy groups we've partnered with. They're eager to collaborate on a broader initiative to address systemic discrimination in the travel industry. Elliot's eyes lit up with purpose. Perfect. This isn't just about one airline. It's about the entire industry. Let's make them all take notice. That evening, as Elliot prepared to leave his office, his phone buzzed with a text from James Chen, the witness from the terminal. James Chen, I've been approached by a few journalists. Let me know if you need me to speak on the record. Elliot replied quickly. Let's coordinate. Your voice could make a big impact. The exchange left Elliot feeling a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't just fighting a personal battle anymore. He was part of a growing movement. As night fell, Elliot stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The city spread out before him like a sea of lights. The fight was far from over, but the tide was turning. He could feel it. For every step back, he had taken 2 steps forward. And he wasn't stopping until the scales tipped in favor of justice. Elliot raised a glass to the night sky, a silent toast to the countless voices now rallying alongside him. This was more than a reckoning. It was a revolution, and he intended to see it through. The tides of change. The boardroom of Nexus Capital was a hive of activity as their emergency meeting commenced. Around the long, polished table, influential stakeholders debated the fate of their significant investment in Global Air. Karen Lin, a senior board member, held a commanding presence, her voice cutting through the noise. This isn't just about optics, she said firmly. It's about accountability. Our reputation is on the line, and silence is no longer an option. Seated at the head of the table, Nexus CEO Jonathan Ellis listened intently. His sharp features betrayed the weight of the decision he was about to make. We've received Elliot McAllister's demands, he said, holding up a document. He's asking for the removal of Martin Grayson, an independent audit, and a complete overhaul of Global Air's leadership structure. It's ambitious, but it might be the only way forward. Karen leaned forward, her tone unwavering. It's not just ambitious, it's necessary. If we don't act decisively, this scandal will consume us too. And let's not forget, McAllister's platform gives him the ability to bring public pressure like we've never seen. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then let's vote. All in favor of supporting McAllister's demands. Hands rose around the table, one after another, until the decision was unanimous. The weight of their choice settled over the room like a storm cloud, but there was also a sense of resolution. The die was cast. At TechCore Tower, Elliot received the news with a mix of satisfaction and renewed determination. Simone entered his office, her tablet in hand, and a rare smile on her usually composed face. Nexus Capital has officially sided with us, she announced. They're pushing for Grayson's resignation and have already begun discussions about the audit. Elliot allowed himself a brief nod of approval. Good. That's one domino down. What's the status of our advocacy initiative? Simone tapped her tablet, bringing up a detailed report. We've partnered with 4 major advocacy groups, including the National Equity Alliance and Travelers for Justice. Together, we're launching a campaign called Flight for Equality. The goal is to create industry-wide reforms in travel and hospitality. Elliot studied the report, his sharp mind absorbing the details. I want this to be more than a campaign. Let's push for tangible results, legislation, partnerships, and accountability metrics. If we're going to fix this, we need to set the bar high. Simone nodded, already taking notes. I'll get the advocacy leaders on a call to align on the next steps, and Rebecca's team has prepared the public announcement for tomorrow. It's bold but balanced. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Good. The momentum is with us now. Let's make it count. That evening, Global Air's leadership convened in their own emergency meeting, but the atmosphere was starkly different. Martin Grayson sat at the head of the table, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a tense, defensive posture. Around him, board members exchanged worried glances. We're hemorrhaging credibility, one member said bluntly. the public backlash is growing by the hour. Nexus Capital's demands are clear. They want you out, Martin. Grayson's jaw tightened. I've led this airline for over a decade. I'm not stepping down over one incident. This isn't just one incident, another board member countered. It's a culmination of years of mismanagement and a culture you allowed to fester. Nexus holds the largest stake in our company. If we don't comply, we risk losing everything. Grayson's voice rose, tinged with desperation. We can weather this storm. Issue another statement. Promise more training. Offer McAllister a settlement, whatever it takes to make this go away. The board members exchanged skeptical looks. One of them, a seasoned executive named Linda Ju, spoke up. It's too late for that. McAllister isn't interested in settlements or apologies. He's demanding systemic change, and he has the leverage to get it. The longer you resist, the worse it will get. Grayson's face darkened, but he remained silent. The room was thick with tension as the board prepared to vote on his future. The following day, the public announcement of Flight for Equality went live. Across social media, news outlets, and corporate channels, the campaign's bold message resonated. Discrimination has no place in the skies or anywhere else. Together, we can create a travel industry that treats everyone with dignity and respect. Join us in the fight for equality. The campaign included powerful testimonials from former Global Air employees and passengers who had faced discrimination. Their stories, shared anonymously to protect their identities, painted a damning picture of the airline's toxic culture. Elliot's personal video statement was the centerpiece of the campaign. Seated in his penthouse office, he spoke directly to the camera, his voice steady but impassioned. This isn't just about one man's experience, he said. It's about a system that has allowed prejudice to thrive unchecked. We have the power to change that, not just for today, but for generations to come. I'm asking for your support, not just for me, but for every person who has been treated as less than because of the color of their skin, their background, or their identity. Together, we can build a better future. The video went viral within hours, sparking a wave of support. Celebrities, activists, and everyday travelers joined the conversation, sharing their own stories and calling for change. Meanwhile, Elliot's legal team moved forward with their lawsuit, filing a detailed complaint that left no stone unturned. The media frenzy surrounding the case only intensified, with reporters camped outside Global Air's headquarters and public pressure mounting by the day. Rebecca Sterling kept a close eye on the narrative, ensuring Elliot remained in control. "We're winning the court of public opinion," she told him during a strategy meeting. "But we need to maintain focus. This isn't just about tearing down. It's about building something better." Elliot nodded, his expression resolute. "That's why we're doing this. Not for headlines, but for lasting change." As the week drew to a close, the ripple effects of Elliot's actions began to spread beyond the airline industry. Other corporations took notice, issuing statements of solidarity and pledging to review their own policies. Advocacy groups reported a surge in donations and engagement, inspired by the Flight for Equality campaign. Elliot stood on the balcony of TechCore Tower, the city lights stretching out before him like a sea of possibilities. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt the tides turning in his favor. Justice wasn't just a distant hope, it was within reach. He raised his glass to the night sky, a quiet toast to the progress they had made and the battle still to come. This was more than a fight for fairness. It was a movement, and Elliot McAllister was determined to see it through to the very end. Victory in the shadows. The first rays of dawn cast a golden hue over TechCore Tower as Elliot McAllister stood in his office, gazing at the city below. Today was a pivotal day. After weeks of relentless pressure, negotiations, and legal battles, the board of Global Air was set to announce sweeping changes. Simone entered quietly, her tablet in hand. "It's confirmed," she said. "Martin Grayson has resigned." Nexus Capital released a statement this morning pledging their full support for the reforms. The airline's independent audit is already underway. Elliot nodded, his expression calm but resolute. And the public response? Overwhelmingly positive, Simone replied, swiping through data on her tablet. Hashtag Flight for Equality is still trending. Donations to our partner advocacy groups have quadrupled since the campaign launched. Elliot turned to face her, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Good. What's next? Simone hesitated, then said, Rebecca wants to discuss how we position your next move. She thinks we need to pivot from the airline case to the broader industry. Elliot's brow furrowed. We will, but not yet. This fight isn't over. We've shaken the tree, but the roots of this problem run deep. Simone nodded, understanding his determination. Understood. Rebecca's on standby when you're ready. Later that morning, Elliot convened a virtual meeting with the leaders of the advocacy groups partnering in the Flight for Equality initiative. Faces filled the screen, each reflecting a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Congratulations are in order, said Maya Torres, the director of the National Equity Alliance. This is a historic moment, Elliot. Your leadership has made all the difference. Elliot shook his head. This was a collective effort, and it's just the beginning. We've won a battle, but the war for systemic change is far from over. Jacob Singh, a legal strategist for Travelers for Justice, chimed in. The reforms at Global Air will set a precedent, but we need to ensure they're implemented effectively. Without follow-through, this could all unravel. Elliot leaned forward, his voice firm. That's why we're forming the Oversight Committee. I want representatives from each of your organizations involved. This needs to be a collaborative effort. The leaders exchanged nods of agreement. Maya spoke again, her tone thoughtful. Elliot, have you considered what this means for you personally? You've become the face of this movement. People are looking to you for more than just corporate reform. They see you as a leader for social change. Elliot's expression softened, a rare moment of vulnerability breaking through. I never set out to be a symbol. I just wanted to do what was right. But if this is where I'm needed, I won't back down. Meanwhile, at Global Air's headquarters, the aftermath of Grayson's resignation was in full swing. Interim CEO Linda Zhao faced the press, her demeanor composed but sincere. Today marks a new chapter for Global Air, she began, her voice steady. We acknowledge the mistakes of the past and are committed to creating a culture of inclusivity, transparency, and respect. The changes we're implementing are not just about repairing our image. They're about rebuilding trust. Her words were met with cautious optimism. Reporters asked pointed questions, but Linda held her ground, emphasizing the airline's commitment to the reforms outlined in Elliot's demands. Back at TechCore Tower, Elliot watched the press conference with Simone and Rebecca. As Linda spoke, Rebecca leaned back, arms crossed. She's saying all the right things. Let's hope they follow through. They will, Elliot said with quiet conviction, because we'll make sure of it. As the day progressed, Elliot found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The initial humiliation at the private terminal felt like a lifetime ago, yet it had ignited something far greater than he could have anticipated. He thought of the countless stories he had heard in recent weeks. Passengers denied service, employees dismissed for speaking out, lives disrupted by prejudice, and systemic injustice. He wasn't naive. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew they had achieved something monumental. Change was happening, and it was happening because they had refused to be silent. That evening, Elliot stood before a packed auditorium at a charity gala organized by Flight for Equality. The event was a celebration of their progress and a fundraiser for ongoing efforts. The room buzzed with energy as business leaders, activists, and supporters mingled. As Elliot took the stage, the crowd fell silent. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping over the audience. When I first walked into that private terminal weeks ago, he began, his voice steady. I never imagined it would lead to this. That moment was humiliating, yes, but it was also clarifying. It reminded me of the work we still have to do. He paused, letting his words sink in. This isn't just about one airline, one company, or even one industry. It's about breaking down the systems that allow discrimination to persist. It's about ensuring that every person, regardless of who they are or where they come from, is treated with dignity and respect. The crowd erupted into applause, but Elliot held up a hand for silence. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. And I'm asking each of you to join me in writing the next chapter. Together, we can create a world where equality isn't just a goal, it's a reality. The standing ovation that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact of his words and his actions. As the night wore on, Elliot mingled with attendees, discussing plans for the future and forging new alliances. Simone found him near the end of the evening, a glass of champagne in her hand. "You were incredible," she said. "I don't think I've ever seen a room so inspired." Elliot smiled faintly, his expression thoughtful. "Inspiration is only the first step. Now we have to act." Simone raised her glass. "To action, then. And to what comes next." Elliot clinked his glass against hers, the sound ringing out like a promise. To what comes next. As the evening wound down and the city lights sparkled outside, Elliot returned to his penthouse, the weight of the day settling over him. He stood on the balcony, the cool night air a welcome respite. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The fight wasn't over. It never truly would be. But for now, there was progress. There was hope. And there was the unshakable belief that together, they could build a better future. Elliot McAllister raised his glass to the stars, a silent vow to keep pushing, keep fighting, and keep believing. The tides of change had turned, and he was ready to lead them into a brighter tomorrow.